Welcome to Podkey Fantasy Football, where camp buzz meets actual scrutiny before draft season. A lot of fantasy takes sound persuasive right up until you ask what actually changed. Talent matters, but usage, health, quarterback play, and coaching incentives usually decide whether a breakout story holds up. The Mike Evans case in San Francisco is straightforward on paper and still worth pressure testing. The bullish argument is real. Strong, deep passing efficiency, veteran targets leaving town, and a player with a long history of 1,000-yard, double-digit touchdown production. If the offensive line is genuinely better and Evans is healthy, you can see the path to him beating a cheap WR3 price by a lot. The weak point is also obvious. When a projection leans this heavily on prior peak seasons, health has to be treated as the swing factor, not a footnote. Godwin has a similar structure. The optimism comes from likely volume and positive OTA reports after the broken fibula, especially if Evans misses time. But volume recoveries after major injury are never automatic. The better supported claim is that Godwin can be useful again. The stronger claim that he snaps right back to pre-injury form still needs proof. The coaching change theme is one of the few fantasy narratives that actually deserves repeated attention. When a coordinator changes, role can change faster than talent does. A receiver can go from low-value targets to high-leverage ones, and a running back can suddenly inherit goal line or checkdown work that was never there before. That matters most in the middle rounds, where we're usually deciding between similar talent levels and betting on environmental changes. The trap is treating every new play caller like a magic wand. Scheme can unlock usage, but it can't guarantee efficiency, health, or chemistry all at once. Zay Flowers is one of the cleaner examples of a ceiling case built on both talent and possible structural change. A 28% target share and top 5 yards per route run already tell you the floor was strong. He wasn't begging for relevance, he was begging for usage to become more fantasy-friendly. If Declan Doyle really brings some Ben Johnson-style sequencing and better high-value touches, then Flowers moving from very good to true WR1 territory is plausible. That said, once a player already has 1,200 yards, the next step is harder than it sounds. More designed usage can help, but touchdowns and red zone role are still the hinge. Jalen Waddle in Denver is a different kind of bet. The argument rests on efficiency, a highly graded season despite limited snaps, and belief in Bo Nix leading a more pass-heavy attack over time. The pushback is schedule and adaptation. If Denver opens run-heavy and conservative, early fantasy managers may get impatient before the environment improves. So Waddle's case works best if you're willing to absorb early ambiguity for second-half upside. That's a reasonable bet, but it is still a bet. Parker Washington is the sort of sleeper profile that gets more interesting the closer you look. The weeks 9 through 18 sample, the 32% air yard share, and the strong WAXI and yards per target markers all suggest real functionality, not random box score noise. The key question is whether Jacksonville's offense actually funnels enough slot-centric volume to support a breakout once rookie competition gets layered in. If Travis Hunter or other additions squeeze the target tree, Washington may stay useful without becoming a true difference maker. Still, among cheaper bets, this one has substance. Trey Harris is more volatile but easy to understand. 25 yards per catch and a Chargers offense expected to take more vertical shots after Keenan Allen's departure is the kind of profile that creates spike weeks fast. The reason not to overstate it is that deep threats can be one roll tweak away from vanishing, but as a late-round dart, Harris has a realistic path instead of a fantasy-only one. Marvin Harrison Jr is surrounded by mixed signals, and the tension mostly comes from how people interpret the same uncertainty. A falling ADP can mean the market is losing faith in the upside, or it can mean the market is finally offering a fair price on talent that hasn't fully hit yet. The Year 3 breakout argument depends heavily on a new offensive context and quarterback outcome, which means a lot of the optimism is conditional rather than bankable. Calling 2026 make or break for his fantasy value is probably fair in a market sense, even if it's a little dramatic in football terms. At some point, projection has to become production. Carnell Tate and Wan'Dale Robinson are almost opposite archetypes. Tate offers contested catch upside and long-term leverage if Tennessee wants a dependable perimeter winner in high-value moments. Robinson's case is much simpler and may be more actionable in PPR. Proven target volume gives him a floor if Tate's transition takes time. For fantasy, that usually means Robinson is easier to use early, while Tate is the more interesting long-term ceiling play. The Justin Jefferson note is really an offensive environment note disguised as a player take. If the ranking created relative to talent, the first thing to ask is whether the player declined or the ecosystem failed him. The argument here clearly favors the ecosystem explanation. Projecting a huge rebound with better quarterback support is sensible. The only part to soften is any specific points per game floor, because floors in fantasy are usually less stable than they sound. Kyler Murray's bounce-back case is easier to quantify because the rushing base does so much work. Over 36 rushing yards per game gives him insulation most quarterbacks don't have. If the system under Kevin O'Connell is truly more efficient and the pass-catching group is improved, top 12 is a very defensible target. Health is still the clause in every sentence. Lamar Jackson is the cleanest one of all. If the decline tracks mostly to lower body injuries rather than scheme erosion, then the conclusion is simple. Health restoration likely restores elite output. That's not blind optimism, it's just following the strongest available explanation. Ashton Jeanty and Omarion Hampton are strong examples of why running back projections can swing on coaching faster than receiver projections do. Jeanty's case hinges on Kubiak expanding goal line and pass game usage behind a healthier line. That matters because touches near the end zone and catches are where fantasy backs separate. The argument is coherent, but it still assumes the staff actually prefers him in those high-value situations. That's usually the last thing to become clear. Hampton's Mike McDaniel bump is easy to get excited about because McDaniel has a real reputation for creating productive rushing environments. Still, top 5 RB expectations require more than better blocking and coach aura. They require durable volume, and durable volume is the hardest part of the projection. Bucky Irving sits in the same ecosystem of upside versus role fragility. He can win multiple ways if healthy, but competition from Kenneth Gainwell and Sean Tucker keeps the range of outcomes wide. That makes Irving appealing later, not safer earlier. Mark Andrews is a classic contingent value pick. If the Ravens tilt more pass-heavy and the staff leans tighter end-friendly, his top 10 case comes back fast. The market discount usually exists for good reason, though. Injury concerns don't disappear because the role still makes sense on paper. TJ Hawkinson feels more like a modest correction than a dramatic rebound. Prior production says he can help, but the target hierarchy caps the ceiling. With Jefferson, Addison, and Jennings around him, Hawkinson's path looks more like steady mid-range utility than a true breakout. Antonio Williams is the kind of late-round fantasy bet that should be framed honestly. If Washington delays a Stephon Diggs signing, the slot path is real enough to matter. If Diggs signs early, that path can collapse almost overnight. So the right way to value Williams isn't as a likely breakout, it's as a cheap option whose value is highly sensitive to one unresolved roster decision. The useful question this time of year isn't who has hype, it's whose path survives contact with context. That's it for Podkey Fantasy Football. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.